Talk Show.
Recorded live.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Travis and Vic's Drunken Horror Adventures. I am being joined by John Borowski. What's up, buddy?
Hey, how you doing?
Doing well. So how's everything
Good.
out there in the Illinois land?
Good. We had a great time last night at the Pop Culture Convention in St. Charles. You know, Zirko runs that, who also does the all-night flea market and the Halloween flea market, and it's just a great time. You know, there's vendors and celebrities and, you know, people selling all types of collectibles. It was a great time. So, you know, I did a little panel on Sunday. So, yeah, it was good. How are you guys doing? Thanks for having me on.
Doing absolutely great. Love talking to you. This is our third time talking, and, you know, we've covered all sorts of subjects. But before we get into the Dahmer subject, which is kind of the events of today, I wanted to ask you, since you did American Ripper, first of all, what was that like? And second of all, you know, have you gotten a lot more interest in your works because of it?
Yeah, you know, it was an interesting experience, actually. I was on American Ripper, which was, I don't know, I think it was about a month or two ago, and then recently Investigation Discovery Channel had a show as well, a three-part show called Murder Castle that they interviewed me for, and they were great experiences. You know, American Ripper, I told them from the beginning, you know, when they contacted me, that I will only discuss H.H. Holmes and his building because I do not believe he is Jack the Ripper, and there's no proof to verify that. So they stuck to that, you know, and it was an interesting experience, and definitely gained more publicity for, you know, Holmes and my other works from it. So, you know, everything like that helps. You know, you look at television now and, you know, Mindhunter is on, and they have, you know, all these other true crime shows. So, you know, again, it really helps my work as an independent filmmaker and author.
Yeah, it's blowing up all over the place. I mean, there's all sorts of different things going on. And on the subject of Dahmer, Oxygen just aired a Dahmer special recently. So again, that's kind of back in the news again.
Yeah, you know, I thought it was perfect timing because of the film My Friend Dahmer, and, you know, we could discuss, you know, kind of my background interests with Dahmer whenever you like. But yeah, you know, there's always, I mean, I think, you know, there's always going to be crime, you know, so I always tell people I've got enough subjects for probably like 100 lifetimes to make films and books on, so.
Yeah, in the past we touched on Dahmer a little bit. It was more of one of those things where you said you wanted to get into probably a Dahmer book and not a film, which obviously panned out for you well. But yeah, I don't know that we ever talked about whenever you first, became interested in Dahmer, because what we had talked about before is that you had a lot of your work was about maybe not household name killers like Albert Fish. I don't think if you ask somebody on the street, they would know who Albert Fish is. Holmes is getting there, but I mean, Tandrim, I don't think the general public knows who he is. So you're always shedding light on the ones that people don't know, but now you're doing one that people do know. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. So when I was in high school, initially I was always interested in film, of course, but I was even more interested in like special makeup effects, because that's what I thought I, you know, wanted to ultimately have, you know, my career as, doing special makeup and masks for films. I always, you know, admired Dick Smith's work and Tom Savini, and, you know, actually did a lot of makeup effects as a teenager. A friend of mine in high school, you know, we did it together. And, you know, one day he called me, and this was around the time when Dahmer was arrested in 91, and he said, "You got to come over to my place." So I did. And his father was a detective at that time. And what my friend thought was a mask catalog, you know, with decapitated heads, was actually the Dahmer file with photocopies of the photographs which Dahmer took of the body parts. And, you know, it had a little bit of his confession in there, not the entire confession and arrest statements, but there was a little bit of it in there, basically, where Dahmer had said, you know, where he was, you know, lonely, and, you know, he didn't want these men to leave him, and that's why he kept their body parts. But, you know, even beyond that, I mean, just seeing the photographs that Dahmer took, you know, he put a head in the sink and take a picture of it, or a head on the countertop, and, you know, the decapitated hands next to it. And they were just, I mean, I'll never get them out of my mind, because Dahmer had said that he would give them a sleeping pill drink and then usually strangle them or, murder them while they were sleeping. But, these heads, the eyes were open in horror and the mouths were open. And it is just, definitely, somewhat traumatic for me in a way because I'd never really seen evidence like that in real life. Of course, I'd always watched horror films. So, I had to purge my system of that. So in college, I made a short film called State of Mind, and that's on my YouTube channel now. People can check that out. It's like a 3-minute short film, which is an interrogation between a detective and Dahmer. And, so that kind of started my interest in serial killers. And then, of course, learning about H.H. Holmes just, compounded that interest. And then I just began looking up, every serial killer, I can learn about. But, I think Dahmer was really the first one that affected me, at a time where, I could understand what a serial killer was and what they did. And, of course, he was one of the most extremes, that there ever was. So, and they've done documentaries on Dahmer. And, I always envisioned doing maybe a feature film, not necessarily a documentary, but I would keep it confined within his apartment and try and build sets to exactly emulate his apartment. So that, I would be interested in that in the future.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, the thing about Dahmer is while Bundy and Gacy were around the same time period, Dahmer's the one that I remember from school years for me. Obviously, that was true of you, too, in some level. But, just growing up, I knew who Dahmer was. I feel like he was kind of the serial killer of my generation. And what makes him stand out from the others? Is it the cannibalism? Is it his charisma? What is it about Dahmer?
Yeah, I think it was, the extremes, the what he did, how he kept the body parts, how he wanted to ultimately create this shrine of body parts and skulls, and how he lived with these body parts. And, the cannibalism aspect, possibly, but it wasn't, I don't know if people really understand. It's not like, he ate every piece of every victim. He had said he tried to bicep maybe another part or two, but he wasn't sitting there, on a daily basis cooking these body parts. So that cannibalism wasn't his primary goal, and I really enjoyed that film, My Friend Dahmer, and I read the graphic novel because it just basically shows how he always had an interest in the inside of the body, working on animals, in his little private lab behind his house. And so he was always interested in that. And I think cannibalism was one of the next steps, and he said he just wanted to see how it tasted, how human meat tasted. So, I think, people, of course, we all wonder why he was doing these things. And, I personally, I think a lot of it has to do with when his family abandoned him at 18 years old. That was traumatic for him. His entire family left him to fend for himself in his house at 18, and then you fast forward and, is it any wonder that he's trying to create this possibly surrogate family by having all these body parts around him that, he could, interact with or do whatever with, very similar to Dennis Nilsen, who was in the UK. They could have been lovers maybe, and maybe if they would have been lovers, they wouldn't have, killed so many people. But they were very similar. Dennis Nilsen did the same thing. He would keep bodies under his floorboards in the first floor apartment and pull them out and wash them, bathe them, talk to them, watch television with them. And he too had an obsession with death because, when one of his grandparents had died when he was a child, he went to the funeral and he remembered them saying they're in a better place. So he always associated death with a better place, and he was always obsessed with death. And I think, very similar to Dahmer as well. He always had an interest in death and the insides of the body, whether it was an animal or human. And I think human was just the next step because he had operated on animals. So I again, a human being was, he was experimenting. He would drill holes in their heads and try and make zombies. He didn't want them to leave him. He would pour acid and bleach in the holes in their heads and experiment. And, his, apartment was his makeshift lab, really. And, I think that's why people are fascinated with him. Same with me. That's why I'm fascinated with, like Dean and Dahmer, because, both of them are a little similar in that they lived with these body parts and they collected them in a sense.
Yeah, I feel like whenever there's a comparison here for me in my lifetime. I remember, and this wasn't maybe in my lifetime, maybe just a little bit before, but the Gacy footage where they're pulling the bodies out from, underneath his house. That's I don't want to say iconic. That's like too positive of a word, but it's something that's kind of stuck with me. But the Dahmer thing's kind of similar in a way where they're cleaning out at his apartment. Yeah, you don't really see what's going on, but and you hear from the neighbors and things like that. It's I think that's one of the things that makes Dahmer so interesting. It wasn't like we found out later. A lot of it we were finding out as they were finding out.
Exactly. And I mean, I do agree with you. It is kind of iconic because, we all, any of us that experienced the Dahmer, post-Dahmer murders, what did we see on the television? We saw them, in the hazmat suits taking that blue barrel out down the fire escape or the back stairs of his apartment building. And that's why, I love the artist Annie Clift. She did the cover art for the book, and she did this phenomenal piece of artwork where it's Dahmer's face, his mugshot, and then the bottom of the face kind of melds into that iconic image of those hazmat, workers pulling that blue barrel out. And I thought, man, this is it. She's hit the two iconic images, Dahmer's, a mugshot plus the blue barrel coming out. And we all know those things. You mentioned Dahmer, you think Milwaukee, the blue barrels, the bodies, cannibalism. And I do think, those things are iconic, unfortunately, but they are. Again, this is the world we live in, I may wear a Dahmer shirt, to publicize my book or whatever it is, and people may not like that. But, at the same time, it's okay if People magazine puts Dahmer on the cover, as Person of the Year, So it always, it's always a weird thing with true crime. A lot of people, a little shied away from it, but at the same time, they'll talk to you for hours because everybody's fascinated by it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, it's like serial killer culture, obviously, tells that story for you of people's fascination with it. It doesn't mean we approve of what they do, but you can't help but just be fascinated by these things. It's a dark part of history like anything else. People are, interested in Civil War, World War II. I mean, those are more horrific than anything these guys did, but it's still interesting.
Oh, right. I mean, there are people that collect Nazi memorabilia, and again, it's not that they are Nazis or interested in it. It's a part of history, and, no matter what it is, yes, these events were horrific, but, again, I tend to believe that we should learn about them, study them, rather than, put them in a closet or forget about them forever, because they did occur, and I think, again, when you look at the cases of Gein and Dahmer, how, almost tribal they were in a sense, because, you look back at these tribes in, the Amazon and these other countries where they were cannibals or headhunters, and they would keep these trophies, shrunken heads, and, Gein and Dahmer, they kind of represented that same type of mindset in a sense.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So what did you think of them plowing down the apartment building that Dahmer lived in? I mean, do you think that was that? I mean, they could have made tourist money off of it, but of course, I'm sure people would say that was blood money. What do you think about them? Just I don't know, just trying to brush it aside, I guess.
Yeah, I don't believe in changing history. I knew the guy who stole Gein's headstone and took it around to exhibit it for money. And again, I personally believe, if history, occurred to leave it as history. Now, if they destroyed his building for certain reasons, like to build another property or whatever, that's one thing. But from what I believe, there's nothing on the space. And, I have a friend in Milwaukee, and one of the stories is, obviously, in many of these true crime stories, they always try and, just decimate everything that was related to the serial killer. So, hoping in that way, that will stop people from talking about it or curiosity seekers, but it doesn't, of course. We knew about Ed Gein's farm. It was burned down, and from what I heard in Milwaukee is they actually had placed some financial restrictions on the chocolate company, Ambrosia Chocolates, where Dahmer worked, to force them out of Milwaukee because they were trying to, again, to cleanse Milwaukee of Dahmer, period, because he did almost ruin their economic development.